area that could play a big role in promoting sustainable investment. How the OECD sees that agreement that is being implemented, what do you expect in the short, medium, and large term for a better Africa?
So in the long term, the CFTA is expected to really increase the African GDP. I don't have the data. I didn't prepare the specific data here, but to have a very big impact on the income levels by increasing trade between African countries, and particularly a formal trade, and also hoping to better formalize trade. Because we know in some regions up to like West Africa, up to 1/3 of the trade is happens through informal networks. Yes. So in the long run, that's the modeling and all the work shows that considerable benefits for the African continent as a whole are going to happen. Of course, there are trade-offs and different types of impact depending on the industries that are integrated and also the types of countries that we look at. And I mentioned before, that some countries are smaller, others have larger consumer markets. So some of the trade-offs would also depend on the structural on the structure of these countries. But at the OECD, what we've been looking at for more of the short-term aspects is are the value chain integration. So in other words, how to develop through the CFTA, because the CFTA opens the door for investment and trade through one country without having to pay for duty and custom fees to the other African countries. And that's an opportunity to develop the trade, but particularly the trade in manufacturing and intermediate goods. So intermediate goods are the ones that can be used as inputs to transform other products. And this is where African countries can use a lot of their potential. So we have done in-depth analysis of different types of value chains in the context of the CFTA. For example, the automotive sector is very developed in the Southern African region. It tends to also grow a lot in North Africa. But at the moment, there is no link between these two different clusters. Southern Africa on the one hand, and more of the North Africa clusters around Morocco, Egypt, and to some extent Tunisia as well. So how to integrate those can be a big opportunity for firms and for the CFTA, and it can also maybe reduce some of the supply chain networks coming from outside of Africa, and therefore reducing some of the environmental impact of shipping goods through very long distances, including the cost of air pollution, for example. Other value chains that we looked at are, of course, pharmaceuticals, but also forestry, how to exploit sustainable forestry. There are big opportunities for investment there. Also, as part of the CFTA, there are many different types of components of the CFTA, including protocols. So there is a protocol on investment that was signed in order to harmonize investment laws between African countries. We saw that there was 194 different investment treaties in Africa, most of them between African countries, actually. So the CFTA and its protocol for investment, again, is enabling to slowly smoothen the trade and the investment between the African countries to reduce the cost. Another good example of another initiative that is coming accompanying the CFTA is the one to clear African currencies. In other words, the idea is to enable a direct clearing and foreign exchange between the African currencies. because to avoid having to change through the US dollar or the euro or
Euro.
other foreign currencies that are not African currencies, and that are
Yeah.
increasing the cost because of the foreign exchange that is happening and that is needed to go to exchange between African economies. So there are also a lot of spin-off effects, including the development of infrastructure, development corridors with the CFTA that are, while they are not solely focusing on trade, that are bringing many positive effects as well, because the CFTA has brought a lot of momentum to the policy-making agenda on the continent.
Wow, wonderful. So there is an economic growth. We have the free trade agreement. So let's talk about and focus this conversation to my country, Spain, if you agree, Arthur. Considering that Spain is one of the 20 top investors in Africa, how can we, Spanish companies or institutions, increase the sustainable development of the continent with by increasing? How can we increase those investments to be maybe in the top 10 instead of the top 20, and of course in a sustainable and equal way, as you shared in your introduction?
The Spanish investment is very important, and how to increase it is, I think, one important aspect is to continue to target some of the sectors where Spain has been very successful and has also continued to have scope to grow, including through more productivity and jobs creation. So if we take examples in terms of the hotel and tourism, has been very important sector, is one, but also taking also some of the experience from Spanish companies in clusters to develop similar types of experiences in the African context. Here I'm thinking, for example, in textile, where some of the design can be brought, exchanges can be learned, and learning from the many experiences of these clusters in Spain that have been very successful, and to develop them slowly also on the African continent, because there's a lot of synergy that can be done here with what African entrepreneurs are doing, but also African policymakers by defining these synergies. So that's the first thing, is continuing to target the key strategic sectors where the Spanish economy and Spanish small and middle-sized firms are strong, to continue to deepen them. This can be done by providing support, such as guarantees to investment and others, to continue to help and support the companies, but also through widening the logistical networks. So the logistical networks through the harbors and the geographic proximity of Spain to the north and the African countries and the Sahel countries can really be a way to increase the trade by putting by making these exchanges and integrating the value chains that we were discussing before between African countries, and particularly the ones that are closer to Spain and Spain, in order to have manufacturing exchange in intermediate goods that can be beneficial. And the third thing is the linkages with the African economies, in particular the small and middle-sized economies. So one element that Spanish enterprises have been to some extent successful at doing is to involve the African firms, working with African partners in order to create the linkages with African economies, and particularly, of course, the small and middle-sized enterprises that create more of the jobs. But however, they tend to have less skills, less capacity than the larger firms. So trying to always keep the linkages with those firms is really important, because they are the ones that will create jobs, and they also need capacitation to increase the capacity through greater skills and others. So that's really important. So focusing targeted areas, as was mentioning industrial clusters before. So it can be through when we look at the investment of Spain in agro clusters, it can be through clusters in the agro clusters, for example. It can be also through special economic zones. Is one aspect that many African countries are trying to promote. I am personally not a big fan of fiscal holidays, because I think that what matters for countries investing is more the talent and the opportunities in the local economies. And fiscal holidays tend to come afterwards. They're not a decisive factor for investment. Otherwise, they will move to the next country as soon as the tax holiday is over, as we've seen in many cases. So it's really important to work with African firms, having business-to-business exchanges to increase the connectivity to firms, local firms that have the capacity or build this capacity to continue to work with them and attract the investment from Spain, and the exchanges between Spanish and African firms, both ways. Second, create also with these firms that can acquire the technology in order to have the technology transfer, and create the local jobs. And last but not least, target the sectors where Spain has really the largest comparative advantage, but that can also be moving very fast. So some of the financial sectors, Spanish small and middle-sized enterprises have been able to target some of the niche markets in specific African countries. That could be one example. Another one is on a textile or sustainable wood processing that some Spanish firms are also doing. And this is where some of the standards that they bring in terms of environmental, social, and governance indicators are important. And at the same time, we need to be careful that these quality standards can be used widely by all different types of firms. Because the issue is that more informal firms who have less capacity to implement those standards can be excluded from the economy and from the participation. So that's why we need to have this work together with the different types of businesses, private sector representatives, to see what are the best ways to continue the investment.
The growth of Totally agree with you. First, skills, financial aspects, infrastructure are key to invest. Not only the fiscal advantages. I mean, that's very important. What you mentioned, Arthur. Thanks for sharing that. Because when Spanish companies, or I think even foreign companies think about investing, they check many things, but we tend to think that they only check the taxing, if there is any tax haven or something like that. So no, it's many more things that Spanish or foreign companies should analyze before investing in any country, and moreover in Africa. No. You mentioned before, Arthur, that Spain is near Africa. We are the door of entry to Africa. But I would like to speak about the Canaries. I live, as I told you before, IBC Spain is based in the Canaries. You have been here a few times, quite a few times. And given that, we are close to the region, we are the unique region in Spain with public structure that deals and cooperates with African governments, with the Directorate General of Relations with Africa. I think there is not, even in Europe, much of those kind of public structures that fosters the relation with Africa specifically. our data shows that around 1,000 companies from the Canary export already to Africa annually, and we have already 200 companies with a permanent base in Africa. But we believe that there is a path to grow, there is potential to grow. What would you recommend to the Canarian companies or the public government that you know very well, the Director General of Africa and of the government, Mr. Luis Padilla? What would you recommend? I know you talk a lot with him, or well, not a lot, but you have a good relation with him. So, what would you recommend to the Canarian companies and public entity on how to improve our relations in terms of trade and, of course, investment?
I don't want to give an answer for which in which I don't believe. So I think the first thing I would need to do is to really listen to the firms and to listen to the challenges that they have and that they face before being able to say we need to do one thing or another. So since I have not done that, I would not be able to give something that is where I know it's going to really make a difference. But here you already have a first step as an answer. I think the having some type of strategic outlook for the government, the regional government of the Canary Islands, as I know it has, through the consultations with the local companies, but also with the African partners and the countries it is particularly targeting, is a first step to give objectives and objectives that respond to the needs of the private actors and that are also cognizant or realistic with regards to the constraints that can be met or that are idiosyncratic to the countries that we target. So in other words, the constraints that you will see in Senegal will be different from the one in Morocco. But I know both are countries where Canary Islands are aiming to work very closely. So we need to have also tailored approaches, not only through for the firms, on the offer side, but also on the demand side with the African countries. That's the first type. Second, I think related to that, I think having some type of industry related or country related information sharing to that purpose can be useful in order to increase the knowledge dissemination and others. What we saw, for example, is that during we mentioned we talked about the investors' confidence. So what we saw is that investors who had better knowledge of and better who had been investing for a longer period of time in African countries have been less risk adverse, particularly with the recent global shocks. So if you take COVID, we measured foreign direct investment. We compared foreign direct investment during the COVID period between African firms and non-African firms. And we saw that African firms investing in other African countries had been 3 times more resilient, so tend to less withdraw their foreign direct investment than non-African firms who have removed massively investment during the COVID-19 period. And as a result, the African continent makes 6% of the world FDI. So that needs to improve, and this is where also the work with the local companies in the Canary Islands and in Spain is really important. So that type of events can help improve the risk perception. Then there are a second type of tool is more traditional tools in the form of insurance mechanisms for investors, but also programs that the government can develop to target specific industries where we know that some of the Canarian firms have competitive advantage
Yeah.
It can be related to tourism, to infrastructure development, to fashion design and others.
Water.
Um, Exactly. And so, in order to increase these linkages, that then the firms, the private firms, can also benefit from.
Okay. Thanks for uh, put up some light on for the Canarian companies. Appreciated. What are the report recommendations for African countries to attract investment, but at the same time balance, or at least try to balance economic, social, and environmental objectives?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, yeah, of course. What are the report recommendations for African countries to attract investment that balance or help them to balance economic, social, and environmental objectives? Because, well, nowadays all have to be sustainable. We are in an era of that climate change and all that global warming is affecting all around the world, and Africa has a lot of natural resources in danger due to those issues, no?
Yes, absolutely. So the typical answer is to have these standards for environmental, social, and governance standards, and to
Mm.
implement them. That's of course very good because it enables firms to have clear monitoring frameworks, key performance indicators, to do auditing, to avoid
Mm.
greenwashing and others.
Yeah.
So that's important. But the issue is that it can add a lot of constraints. First, in terms of implementation cost. So what we could see is that the companies in the African or anywhere, but particularly in Africa, that can use and adapt that type of frameworks are companies who already have a lot of capacity, are larger firms, and in order to be able to do the auditing and the reporting on
Mm.
how they perform on these indicators. And that can be a constraint on investment and including on the investor confidence, because if
Mm.
we don't have the data and the ways to report on these indicators, then the responsible investor may not invest because maybe the environment is good, but there's no information about it. So
No,
that can be an issue.
an issue.
So
Mm.
defining ways how to implement them where it's possible is of course crucial. But second, there are also some institutions who are specialized. If you look at impact investors, for example, who are
Mm.
specialized in investing more in what we call the missing middle. So the middle-sized enterprises that have high potential for growth, but tend to be not visible, not on the radar of the higher investors, because these firms are too small to be identified as microfinance,
Mm.
and therefore they don't fall into the more of the social
Yeah.
investment type.
Mm.
But they are also so they are too big to be microfinance, but they are too
It's,
small to attract the attention of the larger equity investors.
yeah.
And so some of this impact investment can be really important, and strengthening it by having more firms that can target and develop these can be really important. And it's difficult. It's difficult because the transaction costs of looking at these firms, making the due diligence and the research, it takes more time because
Yeah.
there's less capacity. And
Mm.
so it requires very specific types of skills to have the certitude that these firms correspond to environmental, social, and governance indicators, and that they can be a reporting and an auditing that will be reliable afterwards. So it requires specific types of skills and can be more costly if it's not done by firms that are expert in this. So that's
Specialized. Mm.
one way,
True.
yeah, of doing it.
Mm. Wow, wonderful. I mean, your messages are quite clear and encouraging. There is a special chapter regarding agri-food chains in West Africa, as we have been speaking, Spain and Canaries are near West Africa, and we are quite good, I would say, in agri-food. So, what potential of this investment? How they can transform the region's economy? What is the potential of that agri-food value chains in West Africa?
It's huge. It's the first. It's we estimate. I mean, the Club de Sahel and the West Africa Club that is part of the OECD estimated that it's about 32% of West Africa's GDP. So very big economic sector in terms of economic weight. And if we look in terms of employment, it's more. It's at least 2/3 of the population working either formally or informally in farming or in agro processing. So it's huge and it's very important. However, there is a lot of constraints, as we know. And if we look in West Africa, 2/3 of the West African countries are net food importers. So that's a big problem for food security. So if we look, if we compare with the European Union, where there is a common agricultural policy in order to ensure the supply of food at minimum price, we don't have that. And a lot of the issue is that some countries have found that they had higher comparative advantages in exporting cash crops, so cocoa, coffee, tea. If you look in other regions, it can be cut flowers, but it's basically the same idea. It's exporting goods and agricultural goods that we don't consume in these African countries in order to get the foreign exchange, and with that foreign exchange then import the goods that are transformed somewhere else to consume them in the African countries. And that's the case of cereals, as we have seen with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's been actually, paradoxically, some countries in Mali and Senegal have resumed the production of cereals as an aftermath of the shortfall of cereals exports, particularly from Ukraine. But also, but also wheat, rice. Rice is a very big issue because it's a lot of it being imported, and some countries like Senegal again have developed 5 agro clusters, west, east, north, south, and center, to avert these issues and to develop more products. So the issue is that in the region you tend to have this dichotomy between large farms and small farms. So the larger farms being more catered towards exporting goods that are not transformed, but because they can generate a lot of foreign exchange and income. And on the other hand, having substantial small farming that are not very productive, but at least can provide subsistence farming and fight against poverty. So this is the typical type of trade-off. Here in West Africa, Nigeria has had very good experience as trying to, include more women and having programs to grow the sector, including through mechanization and some others. So these are some of the examples, but it's particular to that country. And I think the different experiences that we have in West Africa need to be really tailored to the different countries in the region, because the climate can be different. There's also a lot of changes happening in the Sahel with access to water because of climate change. So the dynamics are changing a lot, and it can be very, very local. There's a lot to be done.
Size of the farmers are small, so the access to finance again is challenging. There are many things to be done, but the potential, I agree with you, Arthur, is huge. It's huge. And with after the free trade agreement, I'm sure it will boost. 2 last questions, Arthur. Thanks a lot. I'm retaining you a lot. Sorry for that, but we are almost there. How do you see the future or the outlook of the sustainable investment in Africa? and what role the international partners will play, including of course Spain, for this future of the continent.
I mean, as we discussed, if you ask my personal opinion, I think that this sustainable investment will continue to grow because it has to, because there's no other option. So the opportunities are there. There's huge potential, and maybe it's the world's last frontier. And as economic growth in Asia will decrease, Africa will increasingly become one of the main sources of growth for the world, and particularly with yet another doubling of its population, it will have huge impact for the world. So how this economic development happens is absolutely crucial. So now it's the time to have sustainable investment, to lay a sound basis for the future, because it is a lot more costlier to rebuild or to do the wrong thing, to rebuild something that was badly built rather than building it right in the first place. So totally it's really now is the right time, and it's very important. Now it does not depend on me. It depends on all the actors. So I think the key elements that we discussed are really how to tackle this issue first of investor confidence, to have a better risk perception on the continent, because too many times decisions are postponed because we don't have enough data, or simply the cost of having access to data, so the cost of doing the due diligence, it tends to be much higher in the African continent than in other parts of the world. So I think that's a very important aspect to leverage and to attract more sustainable investment. And the second aspect, of course, is the capacity, the skills in the African continent, because having better information, better data and policies is one aspect, but we need to have the absorption capacity as well. So it needs to come through having, the exchange and technology transfer between firms in the Canary Islands and the African firms with whom they work, to strengthen the capacity. And this goes through very practical and operational aspects and work together that needs to be done. So I think these two elements are really vital.
Perfect. And just to finalize, Arthur, I would like to ask you to share a key message for our listeners about the sustainable development in Africa and the role of all the international partners and national partners, of course. What would you like to share as your last message for us?
If I can come back to two little things, to some of the questions you asked, to complement some of the things that I had. The first one was with regards to West Africa. We mentioned the need, also for very practical and operational solution in the agri-food. Two barriers that we have seen that are important is the waste of food. So developing the technologies and better logistics to avoid wasting the food that has been produced or transformed but cannot be delivered because it has not been well stored, or the roads and infrastructure are not in good shape, is one important factor to lift one obstacle to the supply chain in agri-food in West Africa. And the second related to that is better irrigation systems, particularly in the context of climate change and access to water. And one aspect that is related to that is women emancipation and empowerment, because access to land is critical, and the irrigation is also done by women, and securing the access and the rights, equal rights to the land will also help there to boost productivity of the sector. So that's one aspect that is important. And the other one on impact investment was we mentioned how important it is, but I wanted to also mention one of the limitations that it has, because the impact investment, it tends to be mainly focused on South and East African countries. And so there is a need to diversify the flows of impact investors from outside Africa to other types of African countries, in particular West African countries. And we have many audiences here from West Africa.
Yes.
So that's important to highlight. And but also having more firms in that field to increase the flows. So you asked me for concluding words.
The last key message that you would like to share with our audience about Africa, international investment, development, what your last message that you want to share with our audience, Arthur?
The big opportunities are now. The median age in Europe is 42 years old. The median age in Africa is 17 years old. So the big opportunity is now. And working together with the African actors at a very operational level, with the business-minded approach. By business, I mean practical. Is really important to create jobs and thereby increase development opportunities, and that will also have a greater effect on social inclusion and gender empowerment, and that will be a win-win for the companies and people in the Canary Islands, but also in the partner countries in Africa. So now is really a time for change and continuing to deepen the economic exchanges and the social and the cultural exchanges between the African countries, the Canary Islands, Spain, and Europe at large.
Thanks, Arthur. Thanks for sharing this last message. Thanks for your time. It has been an amazing pleasure to talk with you, a true expert in Africa, international investment, development. We have tackled all our questions, and I hope you have enjoyed also this conversation. Sorry for taking much longer than expected, but it was quite interesting, and I didn't want to interrupt you. And thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, David. It's been really a pleasure, and I look forward to staying in touch and continuing the exchanges with you and with our audiences. Thank you.
Thanks.